want to start out by welcoming you all. Donc, je vais commencer en vous souhaitant tous et toutes la bienvenue. This event is co-hosted by the International Political Economy Network of the Center for International Policy Studies and the Department of Economics. And both organizations are related. Nous sommes ravis donc de présenter la conférence de la sénatrice Diane Bellemare aujourd'hui. Senator Bellemare will be speaking on a topic that's very close to my heart. It's great. On why is it necessary to review the Bank of Canada Act, ou pourquoi est-il nécessaire de revoir la loi sur la Banque du Canada. Today's talk will be both in English and French. The Q&A period will also be bilingual. Et avant de donner la parole à notre conférencière, je voulais juste inviter mon collègue Mario Seccaraccia, professeur émérite au département de sciences économiques et ancien membre du réseau en économie politique internationale, à introduire la sénatrice qui prenait le nom.
Merci. D'ailleurs, je voudrais d'abord remercier Jackie et Lilia parce qu'ils ont quand même contribué à organiser cette rencontre qui est absolument importante entre les deux départements. Et aussi, naturellement, excuse-moi, je voudrais, en tout cas, j'ai le grand plaisir, je veux dire, vraiment le grand plaisir de vous présenter la sénatrice Diane Bellemare. Diane Bellemare, elle détient un doctorat en économie de l'Université McGill. Elle a été professeure des sciences économiques et aussi des sciences administratives entre, justement, 1972. Je savais pas que c'était aussi loin que ça. Je pensais que entre 1972 et 1994, à l'UQAM. Et après quoi, en 1994, elle a été nommée entre autres à la présidence de la Société québécoise de développement de la main-d'œuvre. Et entre autres, elle a été aussi présidente de la commission des partenaires du marché du travail et vice-présidente du Conseil du patronat du Québec. Et aussi, depuis 2012, elle a été sénatrice du Québec à Ottawa. Senator Bellemare and I go back quite a while. We know each other for almost half a century, literally, because we were both PhD students at McGill University in the 1970s and had the good fortune of having had the same doctoral thesis supervisor, Jack Weldon, at the time. While graduate students in the mid-1970s, we had also both worked individually as consultant economists. I want to highlight that one because I think it's an important one to show where Diane is coming from in a way. We were both consultant economists for the Associated Railway Unions. That I have done that after you. You probably don't remember that. And that involved at the time 17 unions or associations, and they were engaging in industry-wide bargaining, which in those days actually covered over 100,000 workers. It was a big. And it was what a dynamic and politically charged environment. And although we obviously had gone our separate ways as we pursued our career paths over the many years, we did have some points of contact prior to 2017. Now here I jump ahead a great deal here because there's so much detail that I would like to skip here right now. However, when I received the Senate Sesquicentennial Medal, I could barely pronounce that word, okay, on the occasion of the 150th anniversary of the Senate, at the time I had promised Diane that upon my retirement, we would try to work together to somehow change the mandate of the Bank of Canada so that full employment be considered as a key policy objective rather than merely their inflation target of 2%. Now, I do not have time to discuss all the lobbying effort that we went through, but I would like to at least highlight that prior to the pandemic in 2019, a group of us met with the previous Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau, and also with the deputy governor of the Bank of Canada at the time, Carolyn Wilkins, to support the idea of a dual mandate for the Bank of Canada. Now, unfortunately, because of the initially with the federal elections in the fall, whatever it was, of 2019, and then the COVID-19 lockdowns in 2020 and 2021, it became really difficult to engage in any serious lobbying effort. And however, despite these incredible difficulties, we did, in fact, get the following mention, at least, in their December 2021 agreement between the Government of Canada and the Bank of Canada. And I quote here, I'd just like to give you this only quote from you go to their website, to actively seek the maximum sustainable level of employment when conditions warranted. Of course, the bank will consider a broad range of labor market indicators and will systematically report to Canadians on how labor market outcomes have factored into its monetary policy decisions. Now, this was the first time, I must say, in 30 years of inflation targeting, that there was a mention of some sort of maximum employment in their joint statements. And I don't think it was, I think it was in part because of our lobbying effort.
I'm sure.
Minister of Finance acknowledged it. Yes, well, that's great. So I'm just saying that now the problem, of course, is that it's merely a mention in their 2021 statement. Their sole focus in their bank's official mandate is that of achieving only that 2% inflation target. Anyways, I won't get into more of this because I'll let her speak at this point. But Senator Miles' current proposal at the Senate is in some way part of this long process that started in 2017, 2018, to get this sort of maximum or full employment objective within their new perhaps, we'll see, mandate. Or maybe lead to a real change, as she's proposing, to the change, legislative change here in the actual Bank of Canada Act. Without further ado, Diane, I leave it to you now.
I'll speak in English and then summarize in French. I guess it will be the thing to do. First, I want to thank you all to invite me. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's very important to talk about different ideas, especially in university. And I want to give a special thanks to Mario Secaro, because he is at he lighted the idea in my mind with the petition he made with this more than 60 economists that signed it to review the mandate of the bank and to review its transparency requirements. So we did since then a lot of job, and thank you, Mario.
Thank you
pushed
too.
me
Sure.
very much. So my presentation will be divided in 3 parts, but I did not prepare slides or anything, but there'll be 3 parts in my presentation. The first one, I will explain why we need to revisit the Bank of Canada Act. That's the first part. The second part, I will go through the bill in itself to explain what it is that I'm proposing. And the last and the final part will be to like a counter demonstration to show you that this bill answers the new challenges of monetary policy today. And these new monetary policy challenges have been expressed by the governor of the bank himself in a recent paper that he published in 2024 by the Center of Economic Policy Research. It's on how the central bank copes with the post-pandemic inflation. So let's start with my part 1, but before, just to have an idea of where you stand if you did answer the survey that the Bank of Canada produced in 2023 about the consumer survey, I will ask you two questions and you raise your hand. Tell me where you stand. In relation to the question is as follows. In your view, what does the bank aims to achieve by increasing the interest rate? Is it lower inflation, raise inflation, or you're not certain? So those who think it's to lower inflation, please raise your hand. To raise inflation and uncertain. Okay, good. The second question is more tricky. In your view, how will rising interest rates affect inflation? Will it lower inflation, increase inflation, or you're not certain? So those of you who think it will lower inflation. Okay. Those of you who say it will increase inflation. And those of you who are uncertain, this survey. So in the Bank of Canada survey, what was interesting to see is that, and I will read how they say it, most people understand that the bank raised interest rates to reduce inflation, but less than half expect it will work. So only 37.9% of the consumer that answer thinks it will succeed in lowering interest rates. And uncertain is 34.5%, and those that say it will increase inflation is 28%. So good to know. Let's start now, because that was for me one of the main challenges that pushed me during the summer appeal on the Bank of Canada Act, because I've always been making speech, addressing motion for studying the Bank of Canada Act, and speak also to include the dual mandate in the Bank of Canada Act. But I never thought of bringing a bill myself. And I was talking with some ex-colleagues, lawyer, constitutionalist, and also economist, and two professors told me, Diane, I wanted to challenge the bank on why they were doing raising interest rates so quickly and risking a recession. I was wondering if it was really constitutional to do that. But so I decided not to go that road. And with what I heard and what my colleague told me, I decided to table the bill to revisit the Bank of Canada Act to show to the public, my colleagues, and to the bank, how it could be done. How could the Bank of Canada Act be a little bit different? So the Bank of Canada Act, I think, must be revisited for many reasons, at least 4 reasons. The first one, I think, is very simple, is that monetary policy is too important to be left to the discretion of the government. You don't want that. Or to be left to the discretion of the governor and its team, no matter how competent they are. It's a big responsibility to raise interest rates. It's a big responsibility that has a lot of consequences on the economy. And the risk of being wrong is much bigger when the policy, the children of one person who thinks alike because they are studying the same economics, and they have living around the country. So I think that's one of the main reasons that I thought it would be important to stress, because the monetary policy is important. So when online with that, the Bank of Canada Act, as you probably know, has been adopted in 1934, and the preamble of the Act was never changed. So in the Bank of Canada Act, there's not really a specific mandate or objective for the Bank of Canada, nor for monetary policy. As you know, John Maynard Keynes, who changed the economic world with monetary and fiscal policy, published the general theory in 1936. So the bank was created before. And since then, the Bank Act has been changed a little, but not much. There's no content really about its policy orientation. It's a lot of management things, that's important. But it's not in monetary policy is not part of the Bank of Canada Act as it is in other countries, in other legislative work. The second reason I thought it was important to revisit the bank is because the Bank Act actually needs more a balanced approach between independency of the bank and its accountability and transparency obligation. In the Act, they don't talk about the transparency, the accountability. It's not meant that the bank is not transparent. The bank does a lot of things according to what it should do, a lot of communication. You go to their website, they have a lot of survey of business, of consumer. They do a lot of communication of their policy 8 times a year. They have 4 times a year, they have a review. They go out there and pronounce this statement and so forth. But what they do, and even the agreement that they sign with the government each 5 years, isn't even nothing to the Bank of Canada Act. So the Bank Act is outdated and completely disconnect from the practice of the Bank of Canada. So that's one of the reasons that it should be revisited. And also, what do we mean when we talk about the independence of the bank? When I speak with people that are not aware of those concepts, they say, "Oh, you cannot do that because the bank is independent." So what does it mean, the independence of the bank? And when you look and you scratch to try to understand a little bit more, when you look at the Constitution of Canada, Article 91, it is the federal government that is responsible for the bank, it's responsible for the currency, and it's even responsible for the interest rate. So, the Constitution say the government should govern for prosperity of the country. So the government did, in fact, gave the responsibility to the bank through time. But this is never written. It's not written anywhere. So the bank actually, its independence is translated into the fact that they decide their own terms of the agreement, because when they propose an agreement with the Minister of Finance, who does the consultation? Who does the research? It's the bank. So the bank decides itself the objective they want to pursue. And when you look at who evaluate the bank, who look at the cost of the policy, who is the bank? It does its own research about what it's doing. So that's quite different from what is done elsewhere. In most of the countries, the mandate of the bank and the specific targets, usually it's a question of the government who gives that to the bank. And the evaluation is what or external or within the finance department. It's not the bank that does it all. So the bank is the master of its own destiny. And in a sense, the independence of the bank, this is not what it means. The independence of the bank really it is independent in the conduct of its own operation, so that the bank does not use its operation at the moment to favor the government of the day, to play with interest rate or the balance sheets or anything in a moment where there's an election. So the independence of the bank is much more a question of operation, of political independence also, but it means political independence in the sense of partisan bank. But the bank has a political role, for sure. It has an economic role, but because it's the consequence of his action are so big, it has definitely a political effect, and it should be discussed, at least reveal what are the costs, the benefit, and what it does. Also, when you look at the guidelines that are presented by the International Monetary Fund, the International Monetary Fund have published recently a code of good practices on transparency in monetary and financial policy. And Canada is not in line with some of those guidelines. For instance, the IMF say the ultimate objective of monetary policy should be specified in legislation and publicly disclosed and explained. So it is publicly disclosed and explained, but it's not into legislation. The central bank said the responsibility of the central bank should be specified in legislation, but it's not. It is within an agreement, and the agreement is written by the bank, signed by the Minister of Finance, and tabled in Parliament. Like I am in the banking committee, and we receive the governor often in committee. But when they table this agreement, we have nothing to say. Question, but we have no input. And they say also in the International Monetary Fund, the broad modalities of accountability for the conduct of monetary policy or any other responsibility assigned of the central bank should be specified in legislation. So even though the International Monetary Fund has given a very good note when they study the Bank of Canada activities and operation, it is not in line with the code of conduct in those specific points. Why we have to revisit the Bank of Canada. The third reason, I think, and one is for me very important, and it is very important for Mario and all of economists who signed this petition that the Minister of Finance, that the Bank of Canada Act needs to include safeguards so that the banks always minimize the cost of its policy towards price stability. So, because even though I agree with what the banks say, what you think, and what the population think, inflation is a problem that has to be cured. Inflation is a cancer that can generalize into the economy and can have very perverse effects. Inflation also can be very bad for the most vulnerable, those that have fixed income, and it has to be attacked. But how do we try to achieve price stability? Actually, the Bank of Canada, its only instrument, has others, but not, they don't, like they could work on the yield curve and so forth, but it's mainly the rate of interest that they changed, or not changed, but they announced interest rate 8 times a year. So it is the tool that they use to By increasing the interest rate, they hope that people will spend less and that price will go down. That's the theory behind this approach. By raising interest rates, you curtail the demand and prices go down. But is this really true in our world? Not necessarily. So by raising interest rates, the cost to the economy, because it has a cost, we at the banking committee here, for instance, that the housing crisis is in part due to shortage of house, and the anticipation to construct have been curtailed with the monetary policy. As interest rates, the mortgage rate were high. Investment comes down, decrease when interest rates are high. Unemployment increase. So there's real cost to the economy in the short, but also in the medium and long term. And in my mind, as an economist, those bad consequences may have a rebound effect on inflation. They may even increase interest, the price. And Statistic Canada gave me right when they published now, it's quite evident when you look at their consumer price index publication, 36% and more of the increase in inflation rate is attributed to the increase in mortgage and rent. So this is in the big economic wheel. When the consumer is pressed because they have to pay more for living, they have to pay more for eating because of inflation, they will ask wage increase. And the more they want to balance the increase in the cost of living, the more inflation started to be entrenched. So the policy of raising interest rates because of its cost have a damage in investment productivity and in the capacity of the economy to cope with inflation in the medium and long run. But it also is a wage spiral. And actually, it's not happening. But if the inflation was going on again, and the impact of the raise in interest rate on mortgages is not yet complete, because there's many households who have their mortgage to be renewed. So it is, all those considerations have to be taken into effect. So we need safeguard, and the full employment, the full mandate is kind of a safeguard because it at least impede the bank to increase too much his interest rate or to be very cautious about it. And finally, the Canadian economic context has changed. Inflation is more and more a supply shock, and it is expected to be so in the future. So because of that, it's important to revisit, and I will conclude by this section when I will conclude with the challenges of monetary policy, actually. So, en résumé, la politique monétaire adoptée depuis 1990 n'est pas adaptée au contexte économique actuel. La législation doit permettre un encadrement qui facilite l'adoption de nouveaux outils pour combattre les chocs inflationnistes incessants et inattendus, tout en assurant un équilibre entre l'indépendance de la banque, la transparence et la reddition de comptes. So, I now go to my bill. What does the bill do? But first, maybe I will speak quickly on how did I do my research? How did I achieve to write a bill? Because when this summer I was doing that, and all my friends were asking me, "You were doing that?" I said, "I'm working with lawyers," but they were all surprised and they were wondering, how can I attack that? This is a big thing. I know but I did attack an issue in my PhD thesis too. It has 800 pages, and it looked at how we attacked insecurity in Canada since the 17th century up to today. So it was a very, very big thesis. Anyway. So what I did is that effectively I compare. I did a comparison of central bank acts. And mainly I concentrate on New Zealand because this is the yardstick for the Bank of Canada. Sometimes they always talk about New Zealand. I compare with UK. I compare you with the Federal Reserve. And I look in depth in Australia because during the summer, something happened. The Australian government tabled the review that they've made on the Bank of Australian Act. And this review was done by some economists and was one of them is very well known in Canada and is Caroline Wilkins, the ex-governor, the ex-deputy governor. So I looked in detail about, it's a big report. It's really, really interesting and it's really documented. So I look at the Australian case, and I look, of course, with the IMF Code of Conduct. And so I put together some ideas, and then I work with the lawyers because I could not written the bill. They wrote it as I want, and we talk and so forth. And I make some phone calls with some person, and I even talked with Caroline Wilkins about it, which were okay with some, not okay with others. But on the main thing, she thought it was interesting to look at. So what does it do? My bill, first of all, repeals the preamble because the preamble was really outdated. So, but it puts a new preamble, which is more in tune with today's challenges. And I specified the bank mandate. So there's two things in the bill about. There's many things that has to be changed in the law, in the act. But I concentrated only on the monetary policy part and the mandate of the bank. So by putting out the preamble, the bank now mandate would be, the mandate of the bank is to ensure the financial stability of Canada and of Canadian financial institutions and to promote sustainable and equitable prosperity and the well-being of all Canadians. So that's general, but it's positive in a sense that this is the Constitution said that we should promote prosperity. So to the question of is raising interest rate and creating a recession, is it constitutional? This is how it started in my mind, If the central bank create a recession in the hope that it will decrease inflation. That's what my really deep concern as a parliamentarian. So this is the first big thing. And the main article of the bill is Article 6, which the Article 6, which creates, in fact, the constitute what we call the permanent monetary policy committee. Okay? So let me pause for an instant to explain to you. Yes. Many countries, they have included into their operation a monetary policy committee. And the purpose of the monetary policy committee is a bit to ease the shoulder of the governor of a central bank who has the responsibility to pick an interest rate, while with a monetary policy you can have the comments, that you can consult other experts, any kind. So it's a practice that is more and more done. Central banks, for instance, they have a monetary policy committee. UK has a monetary policy committee. New Zealand has a monetary policy committee, and Australia will have a monetary policy committee soon. If not now, I don't know, but I know that it was contemplated. So these committees help the governor. Usually, those committees they vote, they report what what was said, and they decide about the conduct of monetary policy. So, in my bill, the composition of the monetary policy that I will be of 9 members: the governor and the deputy governor, and the deputy governor responsible for economic analysis or any equivalent duty. And I add 6 external members that would be appointed under another section. 6 external members that would need to be qualified, and they will need to, well, there's a list of qualification here, but they will need to be recognized in their field for their skills and knowledge in at least 2 of the following subjects: open economy, macroeconomics, the financial system, the labor market, supply chains, and risk management. They will have to be chosen from a transparent process that is not written here, because my proposal is that has been, for those of you who read the New Zealand Bank Act, it's so detailed. They would say even the color of the eyes you need to be. It's very, very detailed what you have to do. But here I just say it's an open and transparent process that is such that people are confident in those external witnesses. I have to say at the outset, really, not at the outset, but now, that 9 members, 3 intern and 6 external, I know that could be a bit of a shock. But I picked 6 external because I think Canada is a very big country, not in terms of population, but it's a large, and it has the province, it has diversity. So at least 6 external, and I thought that 9 would be manageable. So, but I know that can be discussed, because when you put the bill in other countries, it's more equal. So if you have to vote, because by doing that, the determination of the interest rate gets out of the hand of the governor and its team. It's a process. So this is one thing it does. Also, it's the Article 7 in my bill, which gives a lot of substance to how we reach an interest rate that with the committee, and how you're accountable for your decision. So in the bill, I propose and have an annual cost-benefit analysis performed annually on monetary policy and on different kind of scenarios. The bank does that, and it can do it to look at different scenarios to measure the possible outcome of a policy. So the Monetary Policy Committee would supervise the construction of this model and the assessment, the running of the model. And so that's one of its activities, but it will be done. I propose also that there would be an evaluation of the policy each 3 years. And how it's going to be done would be assessed and superseded by the Monetary Policy Committee. And the Monetary Policy would also represent the bank in the negotiation of the agreement. So do we have a band? What kind of target we want to do? And the Monetary Policy Committee would also ensure that the use of non-traditional tools is consistent with the bank's mandate and the objective of the policy. So the Monetary Policy Committee is something very different. It's a trend in the best practices. And so that's the big thing of my bill. The next big thing is the purpose of monetary policy. And this is where it says the monetary policy should adopt a dual mandate, because many countries do that. So by having the dual mandate, we have kind of a safeguards that the bank will not create a recession, because that's in my mind something that's counterproductive. When you fight inflation by creating a recession, what you do is you reduce your wealth, you reduce your investment, you reduce your productivity and your capacity to absorb increases in wages to cope with, intermittent inflationary shocks. So you need, in Canada, that's a main challenge is to invest, to increase productivity. And if monetary policy is counteract all the initiative we do, then we are in big trouble. So this is what the bill tries to do, to put some guidelines so that the bank, with the Monetary Policy Committee, find the tools to cope with inflation without having the perverse effect of the monetary policy based uniquely on interest rate. And it tries also, because there's a section in it, to have a coordination between monetary and fiscal policy. This is a subject that I talk often with the governors when they come at the banking committee. I always end up with this question: why don't you coordinate it? Over the years, they have softened their position. Now they say they have to coordinate. But 6 years ago, they were not saying that. And one of the reasons was that they were afraid to not be considered independent. Because if they work with the government, then how can they be independent? So that this dilemma I try to answer with the monetary policy that's not part of government, that has to be, the experts have to be chosen, though, different groups. Like in New Zealand, there are 3 members, one representing the labor, one representing more business, and a university. So they can have a balanced approach. So mainly this is what this bill is about. So it precises the objective of the bank. It gives a mandate to monetary policy. It provides safeguards so that the policy is not perverse into the medium and long run. And also, it's enabled the bank to be innovative. It gives the bank a tool to become more of an innovative in their tool, especially if they can work with the finance department. So I think this will answer the main concern also that the governor said in the paper I just told you about. The governor, resuming or summarizing the challenges of monetary policy, he spoke about mainly 4 issues that the bank has to cope with, and any bank. The first thing he said, and he repeated it, it's much easier to restore demand than supply. And as he said, more and more we will have supply shock. So what you can read within the line is that we had a policy since the 90s who played on the demand side. And we did use it and it went well. But now that we can expect much more supply shocks, then monetary policy as it's done now, it's very hard. It has perverse effect. Second is a very open economy. So Malcolm said, uncertainty has increased. And uncertainty is not predictable. So it's not like uncertainty by definition is unpredictable. And it has increased at the rhythm at the rhythm of our openness to the world. And third thing he said, we cannot govern anymore with our econometric models. Because econometric models are based on the past. So if we need to act in the future, then you need other tools. And my tool is the Monetary Policy Committee, where the people can foresee some of the change if they are chosen correctly. They know what's the challenge in the sectors, in the industry, the different market. And they can say, oh, your model now doesn't predict well. So they can monitor their model with a monetary policy. I think they couldn't do by themselves because they are only a board of people that have the same kind of training. So this third thing, it's really, and the governor of the bank talks a lot about the model, reviewing the model, but the model doesn't work anymore. No, as much as it can explain. The model can explain what went wrong, but it cannot help to what we can do there. And also, he talked about public policy trust cannot be taken for granted. My question I asked for you at the beginning, those of you who think it will work, more and more people think playing with interest rate will not work. So the bank has a big challenge of trust. And who can bring trust? A monetary policy committee with the right person who have been chosen the right way and explain the right way to the Canadian challenges of today. So that's conclude my presentation. And I'm open to answer your question if I can answer them. Okay. Okay.
We have about 5 minutes for questions. En anglais, comme vous voulez. Peut-être prendre quelques-uns à la fois. Et si vous pouvez aussi, if you could also introduce yourselves, vous pouvez vous introduire, ce serait excellent aussi. OK, ahead.
Merci, Jackie. Merci, Madame Bellemare, pour votre présentation de justement sur cette réforme que vous avez proposée. J'aime bien l'idée du comité de politique monétaire. Effectivement, je pense que ça aiderait à élargir à tout le moins les discussions et amener d'autres perspectives. J'ai 2 questions. La première, c'est simple, vous n'avez pas parlé dans votre réforme par rapport à l'indépendance de la banque. Au début, dans la première partie de votre présentation, vous avez dit que, bon, idéalement, l'indépendance de la banque devrait se retrouver dans la loi et non pas seulement en pratique, qui est le cas actuellement. Donc, je ne sais pas si vous pouviez, je ne sais pas si ça se retrouve dans ce que la réforme. Et l'autre aspect, et ça, c'est une question peut-être un peu maligne, est-ce qu'on pourrait penser que les réformes que vous proposez, si elles avaient été mises en place avant la récente montée de l'inflation, est-ce que vous croyez que le comportement de la banque aurait été différent? Dans le sens où est-ce que la banque aurait commencé à augmenter les taux d'intérêt plus tôt qu'elle ne l'a fait, ou au contraire aurait attendu plus longtemps? Alors, je serais curieux d'avoir votre point de vue là-dessus.
Pour moi, c'est très difficile de répondre à cette question-là.
Ça, c'est une question un peu maligne, là, je l'avoue.
Sur la question de l'indépendance de la banque, il y a pas d'article qui définit l'indépendance de la banque, bien qu'il y a un article qui demeure, qui donne les pleins pouvoirs au gouverneur. Le gouverneur, il y a un article dans la loi, tout ce qui change simplement, je vais vous le lire, c'est au début, les attributions, powers of governor, ou les attributions du gouverneur. En anglais ou en français?
Vous pouvez y aller en anglais, il n'y a pas de problème.
The governor of the bank is the chief executive officer of the bank and on behalf of the board has the direction and control of the business of the bank. Authority. Excusez-moi. Authority to act in connection with the conduct of the business of the bank and in all matters that are not by this act or by the bylaws of the bank specifically reserved to be done by the board or by the executive committee or by the monetary policy committee. Alors, le gouverneur est quand même très indépendant. De deux, j'ai oublié de dire, c'est la pratique actuelle de l'entente quinquennale. Okay? Où il y a une entente. Elle demeure, mais elle est dans la loi, elle est dans mon projet. Il y a toute une section où on reprend les ententes quinquennales. Et la loi peut être visée aux 5 ans. Donc, si on pense que les ententes quinquennales, c'est plus bon, on peut revoir. Mais les ententes, l'entente avec le gouvernement qui prévoit, les objectifs visés, ne dit pas les moyens, mais qui prévoit les objectifs visés. Et donc, là, avec le mandat dual, et qui est cette entente où le comité de politique monétaire participe à sa rédaction.
Merci.
Yes, thank you. What do you think interest rates should do now, given that there's a lot of rate cuts priced in for the rest of 2024, and so what would be your recommendation based on how you see the economy evolving, inflation coming back to target? And the other thing is, it would seem to me like the maximum sustainable employment is not being met right now because we've seen gradual increase in unemployment. So just wanted to know what you thought the bank should be doing now, given that it has raised interest rates so high so quickly.
I would be inclined to adopt a position if I was a member of that committee. I will be inclined to say that we should try to increase the interest rate. And some international boards are saying that actually, that if inflation is under control, start to decrease. I think it will give some oxygen. It will permit to boost investment because we have to do that. And I'm so surprised that we don't have a committee or a council on growth, prosperity, and productivity, and economic council. And so, because at the banking, I'm not answering your question, but I cannot answer more than that because I think we should start to lower March or maybe June, so that the signal is there and stay there for a while. I don't think it should go down quickly. I think it should start to decrease, but in levels. Okay, so that we should try to have a yield curve that promotes investment and that permits to have investment to be financed in the medium and long term.
How do you think, like you mentioned in the agreement, the Bank of Canada is supposed to be considering the maximum sustainable employment, and it has a bunch of measures. And where do you think do you think that stands right now?
Good question. I forgot that because there was a lot of question in your question.
Sorry about that.
Me, I think that the indicator that is the most, it's better indicator to state what's going on in the labor market is to compare vacancies and the number of people that are unemployed. That's the beverage kind of approach way back. And there was a time, not very far, 2013, 14, 15, where we had 6 or 7 unemployed person per vacancy. So that's really not full employment. Eh? Well, there was a time in Quebec where there was less than 1 person per vacancy. So employers were fighting to get this half person. That's not possible, but so that's really, that's not sustainable either, because employers who cannot find workers, they will quit or they won't come. So it's a problem too. So you have to balance vacancies with the number of unemployed. And when you look aggregate, doesn't give you the good picture. You have to look at that about disaggregate level. And you have to look at those that are not yet in the labor force, that would like or that are discouraged, that you need a lot of training, skills development. That's also a field that I think is really, really important. And just to tell you, I was reading the strategic plan of Australia recently about skills development. And they start by saying, we are putting the skills development plan so that the cost to fight inflation is lower, so that monetary policy get easier. So there's a really an important link between labor market and the monetary policy and skills. Skills is an issue. It is an issue in Canada. We don't valor enough.
3 people, so I think people take time. So yes.
Yannick Dessous du département de sciences économiques. Merci pour votre présentation. J'ai 2 questions. La première question, est-ce que vous craignez la politisation de ce comité étant donné notre politique Canada? Et qu'est-ce que vous avez précisément dans la loi qui va prévenir cette politisation de décisions qui sont prises?
Dans le projet de loi, bon, d'abord, c'est un problème, c'est une problématique réelle. Il faut toujours penser au pays, vraiment faire attention à qui est choisi. Dans le projet de loi, il y a les qualifications importantes qui sont précisées. Donc, ça doit être des gens reconnus. Donc, c'est dans la réglementation là, que ça va se faire. C'est pas dans la loi de spécifier comment être reconnu, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire, et par un processus transparent. Donc, ces mots-là impliquent que le processus ne devrait pas être participé. Il devrait être comme on le souhaite, un processus où les experts de leur milieu contribuent à ce comité.
Rapidement, la deuxième question. Vous semblez dire qu'en face de choc d'offres, il ne faudra pas gérer la demande. C'est-à-dire, en fait, il ne faut pas utiliser le taux d'intérêt pour créer une récession afin de réduire le taux d'inflation. À quoi vous pensez comme autre outil que la banque pourrait utiliser qui est de son ressort, c'est-à-dire le ressort de la monnaie? Je ne parle pas, par exemple, des questions des compétences, des skills dont vous avez parlé, qui ressortent du gouvernement. Quels sont les autres outils que vous pensez que la banque pourrait utiliser pour affecter la demande dans de tels cas? Parce qu'on fait face à un problème épistémologique sérieux, c'est de la profession, en face de choc d'offres. Je ne sais pas quel autre instrument on peut utiliser pour pouvoir réduire l'inflation en autant qu'on soit.
Je veux juste redonner parce qu'on a une minute de temps. Est-ce que, donc, oui.
Merci pour votre présentation, Secretary. My name is Lucille Lebert, and I have a history. I don't have an academic stance, but I have an insurance and risk management experience, and I currently work for a Crown Corporation here in Ottawa. So I was just very fascinated by your proposed new bill, and you specifically indicated in Article 7 how you would reach interest rate accountability framework. You have another section that deals with quantitative easing.
It's in this section, the non-traditional tools.
Okay.
That's include
Quantitative
easing and so. Okay.
So it's also in section 7? No, this is available online. I'm very curious to see how that would work.
So. Sorry.
No, I think it was Article 7. At least that's where you.
Maybe. Trying to find out where and underline monetary policy, disclosure, cost benefit, assessment of monetary policy.
So they would also do a cost benefit.
Factors to be taken into account. It's somewhere where it says it should supervise the use of.
And they would also do cost benefits on the cost benefit of quantitative easing.
Exactly.
All of that. Okay. Yeah.
It's all that.
Okay.
It's cost benefit of
Everything.
every scenario, including the non-traditional tools.
Okay.
And in the non-traditional tool, to go back to your question, the Bank of Canada, this is time for the bank and the government to work together. Because the bank, you're right, they don't have thousands of ways to coupon, to influence the economy. And all their instruments are powerful. So the interest rate is the most powerful of all. Okay? Quantitative easing has an impact also on interest rate, and it's the yield curve for inflation. But fiscal policy can do much more. As there's programs, they can be more specific. They can be financed on different ways. So if you coordinate the fiscal and monetary policy, that's a win. And then, if you want to play on the demand side, you can have a special tax to decrease the demand side. Or instead of raising the interest rate, you have a tax on specifics, maybe that you want to manage your demand. But to do that, you need credibility, and the government don't want to do that alone. They have political problems. But if it's in a system with a monetary policy committee, where the government is not part of the monetary policy committee, they are there as an observer. The Department of Finance is there as an observer, and they are there also to give their point of view. And there's in the bill, there's an article who say they should meet that 3 times a year or something like that. So there's a dialogue there, but the monetary policy committee is the committee that architect is the more complex strategy to promote at the same time price stability and growth. Because you can do it, and by doing this way, you reduce the risks of errors. You're not putting the Canadian economy on a yo-yo, increase the rate, decrease the rate, so that the business community, they don't know if they should invest or not. So it's an institutional change that I'm proposing. And as an economist, my biggest discovery of being a senator is that words matters. Numbers do, but words matters. And they influence the numbers. So legislative work has an impact in economics. And if you want to solve some, it's not the only way. You cannot only legislate to solve a problem. But bad legislation or good legislation can improve the numbers and reduce uncertainty. But what you need is civil society to participate more in the design of. So that's why I promote a monetary policy committee, where they have more external committee. Like Norway has more external committee than internal. The external members are in bigger number than the internal. So that's why I proposed it. And on the skills development side, I proposed a kind of approach of a council with the people to know where invest the money.
Questions 3. I had a question, but I'll probably leave that to great. Okay. Maybe we're going to take the questions quickly. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm Isabelle Salle. I'm a Canadian research chair in macroeconomics, and I used to be a researcher at the Bank of Canada. I have a PhD on inflation targeting models, so I didn't pick the whole afternoon on what you said, but I'm going to try to be very brief. So on your first 2 points, I totally in line with what you said, that writing in stone in a way a disagreement about this flexible inflation targeting mandate. But one thing that's important to consider that they already have targeting mandate. And into account the effect on output and also on financial stability and a little bit on Canadian dollar, although they don't say it so much. So it's already in there. How exactly it would have changed the framework? This had been in place. It's hard to answer the question, although it's still a good thing to put it in the law. But when you start getting into the creation in governance by saying maybe you need to, have different tools. I want to come back to what my colleague said. We don't really have something as an interest rate. So we do have communication that can anchor expectations, and then it becomes less costly to stabilize inflation. But there are no other ways. It's very dangerous, I think, to try to mix the bank together with the finance minister, that they work together, because it always ends up price. And I think it's not the best. Of course, it's not ideal what we have. It's independence of central banks, but it's maybe the framework. And saying that one more thing, when we say that when we increase interest rates, it increases inflation. Well, we cannot just look at numbers to say that, because it's a traditional fallacy to look at this just by numbers. We need to have a counterfactual scenario. What would have happened if interest rate had not moved, or if they had gone down? And then you can see the effect, the increase of the rate. And for sure, I can show you 20,000 different models, very different in spirits, that they are all using there. If we had not increased the rates, or if we had increased it less, or if we had decreased it, inflation would have been a lot. And the reason why they cannot decrease the rate now is because inflation expectations are too high. And their big struggle right now is how to put them down. And they just don't know how to do that. And one last thing is, very last, we also a small open economy. So whatever the US does, we have to. Right. When they start tightening a lot, we have to we keep our rates low, and they increase their rates, and that puts back on our currency. So there are a lot of.
I need to take some more questions.
But I want to give a few more voices. It's okay. I'm sorry I took so much time.
That's
Hard.
Thank you for this engaging discussion. I'm Yusra Nafi, policy analyst at Canada's Public Service, and I'm attending this in my personal capacity.
You speak louder because I don't hear you.
Okay, I'll say again. So I'm Yusra Nafi, the analyst at Canada School of Public Service, and I am attending this in my personal capacity. And my question is going back to the federal government. In your proposed bill, there is roles that OSFI as an independent federal agency plays in your community, monetary policy community.
federal.
I can.
Can you repeat that louder, please?
Yeah, I'm asking about, is OSFI as an independent government agency plays a role in your monetary policy community or your proposed bill?
OSFI is not into that.
Because they usually they regulate most of the banks in Canada, so they play a very important role in regulating the financial policy.
We meet with philosophy a lot at the bank.
Yeah. So
the banking committee.
there is no kind of connection the federal government and Bank of Canada in your proposed bill.
This raises actually to be what I put myself on the list a while ago, but I'm just going to there is this wider question of the role of the Bank of Canada in financial stability. And the Bank of Canada is unusual in that it does not have responsibility for regulating banks. The Fed, unlike the Fed, they tried to take it away from the Fed and the Fed resisted. They took it away from the Bank of England and disaster ensued and they've given it back to the Bank of England. And it seems to be particularly as we're dealing with, we talk about climate crisis, but that's one of the sources of these exogenous shocks. That a lot of the responses involve financial regulation rather than, and that those things are becoming increasingly connected. Canada also does not have much in the way of a macroprudential regulation infrastructure. They're partly the result of federalism. These are not easy problems to fix. But I was also curious whether the financial stability and thinking about the peculiarities of the Canadian context, we got away in the 2008, we weren't hit that hard. But, another meltdown, I'm not sure we have the capacity with these very diffuse and uncoordinated, and where they are coordinated around macroprudential. That's one of the criticisms of my math committee was that basically it's not clear that macropru is being done, but kind of here and there. Again, those seem to be interesting questions that are not. Maybe that's not the point here.
The point is that I'm talking about monetary policy.
Yeah, you don't know. Yeah.
And I didn't.
It's opening another can of worms. Yeah.
And to your answer about, I think the trend of the monetary policy committee is something very important to accompany those that do econometrics and those are based on the past, and we are in an uncertain world, and we need to build confidence also. So I think the Bank of Canada did all sorts of good things, but when we look at what they did in the past with the old way to do things, because they are doing the old ways to do things, we know that it has been very costly. The 90s, the 80s, the monetary policy that was adopted at those times. We know that Canadian standard of living is decreasing. Actually, we need to increase productivity. And what we need is that the interest rate, the cost of money in the country is something that's critical. It's like the art of the economy. So when you play, we increase the you have consequence. So that's my answer.
That's fine. Thank you. Just out of time, I know some people are going to have to be leaving at this point, but what I would suggest maybe is if other people have more informal questions, we can have an informal conversation, but I'm recognizing also that some people have classes to get to and so on. So I just wanted to formally thank Senator Bellemare for this wonderful talk and wonderful